right, let's talk Florida Gators. Of course, this is a team, big name program. Of course, they're one of the SEC Blue Bloods. We all understand this, but they're sliding under the radar. They had a really strong finish last season, but they still seem to be a little bit away, at least if you listen to the prevailing wisdom, from being a top flight contender in the SEC and, of course, in the college football world. But when you take a look at the data, and we'll do a deep dive in just a second, folks, this Florida Gators team, they're dangerous. We'll explain why in just 1 second. But first, I'm Nick. That's Andrew, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection. So there's a story that comes along with every team that kind of relaunches itself, right, and comes out of supposedly nowhere overnight and becomes a dominant force again, right? It happens slowly, as the saying goes. It happens slowly and then all at once. And what the Florida Gators have done over the past really half decade or so, last 3, 4, 5 years, in terms of adding talent and winning these battles when it comes to the recruiting pipeline, has gone unnoticed by a lot of people in the media. But when you look at the data, they are on the verge of an exceptional breakout. So before we get a deep dive into that, there are two real important things that any team that's trying to launch itself has to do. This goes back to Nick Saban at Alabama, Kirby Smart at Georgia, right? It's a refrain that happens throughout the entire college football world. Urban Meyer had to do this with the Florida Gators, of course, when he took over the reins a number of years ago. The first thing you have to do is reset the standard of the talent you want on your program, right? If no matter how good of a coach you are, if you have, not to be mean to 3 stars, I play college football, I wasn't even close to a 3 star, but if you have a 3 star talent baseline, you're going to lose to a 4 star talent baseline every single time. So you need to re-emphasize your new baseline. You need to push that. Then you need to maintain that baseline and slowly add more players to it. So you want to become a better football team, even though if it's fewer players, and then slowly but surely accumulate a deep and talented and consistent roster based on that new baseline. So let's go into our first chart here to talk about that. So this is a ranking of or a report here, an analysis, a table, a chart, whatever you want to call it, of the average recruiting score in terms of a per player basis that the Florida Gators have had going back to 2022. So you can see in 23, Billy Napier, right, early in his tenure at the Florida Gators, he reset the baseline, right? The first year, 2022, it was south of 89, and starting in 2023, it jumped up to 91. That's a pretty big jump. That's like the difference between being number 5 recruiting class and number like 15 or 20. That's a big delta. That's 9 wins versus 11 wins, in terms of just talent on paper, just with that jump alone. But the thing that I think really stands out to me is that he maintained it, right? This is critically important. You set a new baseline, and then you maintain that baseline, and then slowly but surely add more and more players based on that baseline. You never sacrifice quality. You determine the quality of player you want, and you just add more and more of those quality players and build a deep and talented roster. And let's go into our second chart here. And this is where the Gators are really starting to look deadly. So again, it's the same time frame. You can see their total recruiting score, which is the number of players times that average recruiting score we saw on the previous slide. So again, this is just basically the Gators maintaining that baseline and then adding more players. You can see in 2022, not so good. You see that spike, same spike. You see that baseline maintained, right? And then in 2025, last recruiting cycle, it popped. What is going on? The Florida Gators, they created a higher baseline talent, maintained that baseline talent, had another year of good players, and then last year they added a lot of really good players. What does this mean going into this upcoming season? Because here's the thing everyone wants to focus on. What does this really mean? What is this data showing us? This data is showing us that this Florida Gators team is a top 7, top 8 team on paper with talent, and they're deep. Right, they have depth across the board, and that's where teams can kind of come out of nowhere and feel like, yeah, they're going to be good, and then they're great. The Notre Dame Fighting Irish are a phenomenal example of this. They're one of the few teams that every single year, regardless of every other program, regardless of how many games they win or lose, they rank about 91 in recruiting in terms of average recruiting score, like I mentioned a few minutes ago. So what happens? They do that one year, the next year, the next year. Then what happens in 2024? They have all these injuries, but they still make a run to a deep postseason run all the way to the national championship game. Why? Because they have so much talent across the board. You can lose All-Americans and still win a bunch of playoff games when you slowly accumulated talent on every position of the highest quality. That's what Notre Dame did, and they surprised everyone, and they're going to be a contender for a long time. And folks, Notre Dame 2024, Florida Gators 2025, very, very similar. A lot of people are sleeping on Florida right now. They're a kind of fun team as they finished out the last season, and obviously winning the bowl game. A lot of nice momentum. They're really great young quarterback there. But I tell you what, if you remove the big names, remove the headlines, and just look at this roster makeup, new baseline of talent, and now a deep, talented roster, a lot of guys with this new high baseline, Folks, this is a really good football team across the board, and they're going to make a lot of noise in 2025. All right, Miles, I know I threw a lot of different data and threw some funky charts at you, so it's very interesting here. Curious what your thoughts are on all of this. But Florida fans, you first in the comment section below. Obviously, we're still a few months away from the season, but it feels like it's getting close, right? We got through spring ball. We're kind of we're inching our way there. What's the one matchup for the 2025 Florida Gators that you're more excited for than any other one, right? It's obviously a bunch of rivalry games, a lot of early season tests, but give us the one game you're really looking forward to more than any other and put it in the comment section below. But Miles, over to you now. What are your thoughts on just this data and just everything going on with Florida right now?
Yeah, Nick, I think, as you said, a lot of data, a lot of charts and stuff to digest. And a lot of people might not be able to break it down like me, not necessarily going to be able to, digest this stuff. So I'm going to give it to you even simpler than that. I think this is all great data. And if you're able to break it down, it shows you exactly what this team is capable of and how they're able to do it through their average recruiting scores and things like that. But if you want to look at it a simpler way, just look at their recruiting rankings over the past 4 years, and it shows you exactly what the graph is. I'm actually going to pull up the graph so we can look at it together and break it down. So we look at the graph here of the total recruiting score starting down, then it goes up. It's kind of flat for 2 years, and then it goes up again. What does their average recruiting score do? They're 18th in 2022. They go up in 2023 to 13th. They're 13th again in 2024. Then they kind of springboard up again. They're 7th in 2025. So it shows you the numbers, everything matches up. The data matches where people are ranking the recruiting classes, where they're, outtakes and analysts and everybody just giving their opinions. That's where these places they rank the Gators as well. So it's not just numbers, not just some deep cut. People are actually recognizing Florida as a team to do this as well. And I think this is really, really important here. I think the Gators, like you said, they're doing something special. And a team, I love the Notre Dame comparison because that's a team that they are very, very wide. There might not be a ton of players on Notre Dame that are like, this is the guy, like this is the star player that's going to carry this team to victory. This is, that one guy that is, Boise State, Ashton Genty. This is that type of player. But no, they're a very wide team. They're really, really solid all across the board. And it's like you said, they can have an injury here. All American goes down. They got a guy right behind them that's maybe a few points in ranking just behind them. There's not a huge drop off from first string to second string because they recruit so well. And with Florida continuing to do this over time, that's what we're seeing happen on the field. This is a team, so. Last year, we see a spark. We start to see some good stuff happen. They go through one quarterback, they bring in another quarterback who obviously is very, very good, does a lot of good stuff on the field for them. We're showing they have the depth, they have the ability to keep things going. Then, boom, they win some big games. This is a team that's starting to look dangerous on the field, starting to look like a team you don't want to come play against. So I think that's really important here. This Florida team, they're starting to pop. And when you look at the projections for 2025, it looks real exciting for Gators fans. The composite rating, seventh overall recruiting class for the Gators. You see the numbers on the charts as well. Correlate with that. This is a team getting ready to go up to the next level. They were flat, they're down, they're flat for a couple years, but now they're going to make a big jump. And I think 2025 is going to be an exciting year to be a Gators fan.
Yeah, and it's important to understand and highlight how hard it is to do that, right? A lot of programs, especially in the brutal recruiting just battles that happen in the SEC, there's going to be usually some volatility, right? You have one year where you're up, and the next year you're down, right? It's every program goes through that, even the worst ones and the best ones and the mediocre ones, right? Just it's just the way it normally happens in the SEC. It takes a dedicated effort, a real strategy, and just a lot of just sticking to the plan, even though you're having to overcome some challenges, and that's what Florida. Billy Napier gets a lot of credit here for doing this. I think the entire organization does for saying, okay, we are going into 2023's recruiting cycle. We're going to re-baseline the talent at Florida. We're going to step it up, and then we're going to do whatever we can to maintain it. The Florida Gators could have obviously watered down the talent. Maybe hey, we like this 2-star over here. We like this 3-star over here. But despite that, they consolidated and said, no, we are going to focus on elite quality guys that we want in our program. We're not going to water down our talent because we're building the foundation. That's what they did in 2023. They followed it up in 2024, and then we saw the spike, right? This is what happens. It's the flywheel effect. You start building momentum. We talk about how the Florida Gators finished last season. The momentum behind this program is certainly trending in the right direction, but it takes usually 3-4 years for that to happen. That's why a lot of these programs, they have a really nice season. They have a young quarterback. Things are going well. And then nothing falls up after that because everything that you have to have in terms of a deep talented roster has to usually take a year or two before you have that kind of breakout season like Florida did at least the second half of the season with their young quarterback. But here's the difference. Here's why Florida's not going to fall apart again. It's because they actually did what few teams could do. They re-baselined their talent with a lot of depth across the board. I'm going to keep hammering on this because it's so hard to do. Most programs can't do it. I really don't think Billy Napier gets enough credit. Now, look, he has made a lot of decisions where criticism is certainly due, right? And he's got to put up or shut up when it comes to results on Saturdays. But if you look at just the overall talent pool and the depth, both sides of the football, quality players, right? It is a new day for Florida. This is the deepest, most talented Florida Gators team across the board since the end of Urban Meyer, right? And that was a long time ago. They've had maybe better seasons, or maybe they've had a season coming into it since then where they were ranked higher or higher expectations. But if you just look on paper, the sheer talent they've accumulated, the plan they put in place, this Florida team is looking like they're in a strong, really strong position. And I think that's why they're dangerous. They are lurking right now in the SEC. We know they're good at quarterback. We now know, looking at the data, they've got a deep, talented roster. And if you got those two things, folks, the sky is really the limit. Looking back maybe 9, 10, 11 months from now, when the Florida Gators are making a deep playoff run, people are going to be like, where this Florida Gator team came from? Man, they came out of nowhere. What an overnight success. Folks, this happened. It began in 2023. It was all part of the plan. We'll see you in about 8, 9 months. We'll see if this comes to fruition. But right now, this Gator squad, they're looking pretty deadly in the SEC.